we move ahead in time to a copyright battle. And for an icebreaker, take a look at source number 9 on your sheet from Marvin Heller's Further Studies in the Making of the Early Hebrew Book. And this tells you just how bizarre our story is. Okay, it's the same source sheet. I didn't create separate sheets. So source number 9. On August 12, 1553, Pope Julius III issued a papal bull ordering the confiscation and burning of the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmuds. There was a Talmud that was codified in Babylon. There was a Talmud that was codified in Tzipori by the Kinneret. Hang on one second. My speaker is not working. I'm going to fix it. I hope to fix it. Okay, you should be able to hear me now. There was the Babylonian Talmud that in Babylon was canonized in Babylon. Earlier than that, there was a Talmud that was canonized in Tzipori, right near the Kinneret in Israel, and that comes to be known as the Jerusalem Talmud. Technically, it should be called the Palestinian Talmud, but I don't think anyone really wants to call it that. But in any case, he says the Pope issues the confiscation and burning of both of these Talmuds. In a time of religious turmoil and repression in Europe, the Counter-Reformation, this particular decree represented the culmination of a dispute between two printers, neither of whom were Jewish, over competing editions of Maimonides' Mishneh Torah with the glosses of Rabbi Meir Katzenellenbogen of Padua. You follow what he just told you? There was a dispute between two non-Jewish printers about printing Maimonides' work of law with the glosses of a rabbi, and it resulted in the Pope saying we should burn the Talmud. What in the world happened here? How did this go down? What was that about? So, in the early days of the printing press, the Italian provinces were among the leaders in adopting Gutenberg's technology. It was German technology, but Italy, it really spread. The Germans were often brought in to set up and run the presses. According to one piece of research that I read, between the year 1465 and 1500, printing presses were established in 77 Italian cities and towns. Well, the Venetian Senate, which was an aristocratic government in Venice that was supposed to govern alongside the monarch and the Great Council, controlled all the trades in these provinces, in Venice, I should say, and they regulated printing. In the middle of the 16th century, printing was taken out of Jewish hands. Jews were no longer allowed to print Jewish books in many provinces in Italy. Jews had been doing it for a long time. Hebrew presses were early adopters. We were among the earliest ones to print books in Italy. The first Hebrew book printed in Italy with a publishing date that we have a record for was produced in 1475. It was Rashi's commentary on the Chumash, on the Bible. Most 15th century Hebrew printers were Jews, the Sansino family being the most famous. They published books of Jewish law, books of liturgy, non-Hebrew books as well, such that by the year 1500, about 200 Hebrew volumes have already been printed. And it's not just read by Jews. We weren't the only market. There were Christian Hebraists, Christians who wanted to learn the Torah in its original Hebrew, and so they would read these books as well. And there were Christian publishers. Most famous one is Daniel Bomberg. Daniel Bomberg was originally from Antwerp, and he was a leading printer. His high-quality craftsmanship, his typographical arrangements, they set the standard for Hebrew Judaic printing. In the year 1524, 1525, he published the first edition of Mikraot Gedolot. Mikraot Gedolot is a text which takes the biblical text, the Chumash, and then publishes commentaries around it. And really, commentaries had their fortunes made by being included in this. The publisher dictated what was going to become popular. So Mikraot Gedolot starts, the first edition of it is 1524. It's still published to this day, although the choice of which commentators are in has evolved over time, so that there are commentators who are post the 16th century who are in it in today's editions. But the point is, he's the one, Daniel Bomberg is the one who prints it. He also is the one to publish the first printed edition of the Babylonian Talmud in 1519, 1523. Actually, in my notes, I have two different dates for the first edition of Mikro Gedolot. In one place I wrote 1524, 1525, and the other one I wrote 1516, 1517. One of those is right. One of those is wrong. I'd have to check later to see why I have two different accounts of it. But either way, he's the first. He's not the first, sorry. He's the greatest Christian publisher of Jewish books. And when Jews are banned from running printing presses, Christian printers take over the field and they hire Jews or Jewish converts to Christianity to produce their content. So that's important background in order to understand where we're going. Okay. There's a note, by the way, in the chat I see about, Marcia went to Cambridge and saw their Geniza collection last year with documents signed by Maimonides and the tear-stained letter he received informing him of his brother's death. Wow. There's a whole story behind that and the death of his brother and the impact it had on him. So if you look at your sheet in source number 10, you'll see the players in our story. The first one, Daniel Bomberg, who I've already mentioned to you. The second one, Mark Antonio Giustiniani, and again, he's not Jewish. He establishes a Hebrew press in Venice in the year 1545. He comes from a wealthy family of patricians in Venice, and he is a cutthroat rival to Bomberg, who is already very old at this point. So Giustiniani says, he puts out a big public ad. He says, I am going to provide all the text Jews need, from the Talmud to recent writings, on beautiful print, beautiful paper, less expensively than all the existing editions. And he hires away some of Giustiniani's Jewish editors and arrangers of the text in order to do this. Now, he's not really interested in producing high-quality materials. What he wants to do is undercut Bomberg, right? He wants to have the business of the Jews. So what he does is, he copies Bomberg's work. Sometimes he'll add a little bit to it, just that it'll be a little bit different, but basically he's just reprinting Bomberg's work. So in 1545, Bomberg publishes what's called Midrash Rabbah. Midrash Rabbah are collections of midrashim on biblical text that were printed 1,000 years before this story, some of them, depending on which volume of Midrash Rabbah. And Bomberg prints it in 1545, and Giustiniani does the same. He hires people, takes advantage of the work that Bomberg already did in cleaning up the text and arranging it and so on. And Giustiniani publishes a ripoff. You think things like this are new to our age, ripoff handbags and whatever it is. They're doing this with books. The Christian printers are fighting over Jewish books in the 16th century. In 1546, Bomberg publishes a Jewish work of grammar. If you're familiar with Rabbi David Kimchi, the Radak, a classic commentator on the biblical text, he wrote extensively in grammar as well. He wrote a book called Sefer HaShorashim. Bomberg publishes it in 1546, and in 1547, Giustiniani comes out with two editions, in one of which he adds a Latin translation with some added material, and the other one not. The Bomberg says, okay, fine. I'm going to go to the Venetian Senate, and I'm going to get an exclusive license to publish texts. And this way, he's going to stop messing with me. So in 1546, 1547, Bomberg publishes a work called the Smag, Sefer Mitzvot Gadol. It is a collection of the Torah's mitzvot and laws with some explanations. Giustiniani says, okay, I can't publish that. I'm going to publish a work called the Kolbo, which is of the same genre. It's a competing work. And he says, I'm going to publish the Kolbo. People won't need to buy his. They'll buy mine. It's the same genre. In 1546, Bomberg publishes a work of law and ritual called Shibbolei Haleket. Don't worry about the names of each book. It's not going to be on the final. Giustiniani publishes a competing work, the Abu Draham. In 1540, or Abu Dirham as some name it. In 1546, Bomberg publishes a work that goes back to the Gaonim, the leading Jewish scholars of the period from the 7th to the 10th century. So Bamberg publishes a work that goes back to that period. Justiniani publishes a competing work that comes back to the same period. If he can't rip off Bamberg's work, then he's going to try to drive him out of business by publishing competing works. And his work is not high quality, despite his promises. The value added comes in context like putting in an index, and indices are useful. But he puts in an index, he'll have a little bit of a translation into Latin, some illuminated diagrams, and that's basically it. Ultimately, Justiniani... Sorry?
Did he have any of his own, did he initiate any, or was
No.
Bamberg first?
He's ripping off Bamberg as far as I can tell. So Justiniani succeeds in putting Bamberg out of business in 1548, 1549. And for a short time, he actually has a de facto monopoly on Hebrew printing in Venice. Now, you might suggest if he's really living off of Bamberg's work, he's hurt himself by putting Bamberg out of business. Right? Because now he's lost his feeder, the one who he could have been working off of. But he has others whose works he can rip off. That's really okay for him. And that's where things go in terms of our story. And Rabbi Meir Katzenellenbogen, also known as Rabbi Meir of Padua, and the conflict that develops between them. But I think rather than try to rush into that, I think rather than rush it, I'm just going to make sure that we understand what we've discussed here in this section. Again, you're talking about a world in which Jews have been banned from publishing Hebrew books. Originally, we were early adopters. We were very into it. But we were banned from doing it. Bamberg becomes the leader. And this fellow Justiniani competes with Bamberg and ultimately drives him out of business, such that Rabbi Meir of Padua is going to come up and publish, or want to publish, a manuscript of his involving Maimonides' Mishnah Torah work of law. And what we're going to see, where this is going to ultimately go, is that he's going to come to Justiniani for the publication of the work. They're not going to be able to come to terms. He's going to try to publish it with a different non-Jewish printer, and that's going to create a battle between the two non-Jewish printers, and ultimately, unfortunately, we end up suffering as a result. Someone, when I taught this class, I did this class at Beth Emeth in January of 2015, and somebody there actually brought in, they had a copy of one of these volumes of Maimonides, which has a remarkable front page that we'll be talking about. But I don't remember anymore who it was who had that. I don't know if it's somebody who's here now, but it was fascinating. Okay, there's a note in the chat about the Cairo Geniza, and apparently a documentary. Oh yes, that documentary came out a couple of years ago, From Cairo to the Cloud. I heard a lot about it, did not get to see it, but I'm told that it was fascinating. So I'm going to stick around, as I've been doing. Oh, before you go though, before anybody goes, I've actually been working on the topics for classes for the fall. So I hope to send out later a flyer with the topics, but right now I'll just tell you, because I've got the list here. I was working on it right before the class. For September, we have, don't write anything down, I'm going to send out the flyer, socially distanced high holidays, tragic or ideal? That will be a mini-series in September. Then we've got